The wind howled through the jagged cliffs of Velthar Ridge, sending spirals of dust and dry moss tumbling across the wide stone platform outside the glasshouse. Inside, Niara paced, her sharp crimson eyes flicking from the communication panel to the empty courtyard beyond the domed walls. Her indigo skin shimmered under the bioluminescent ceiling vines, and her two headtails, braided tightly for formality, twitched with every step. 6 calls, 6 refusals, she muttered, glaring at the glowing interface. "What am I, a cursed beast handler?" the panel chimed softly. She didn't need to look, it was another automated reminder from the emissarial assembly. Attendance at the Interspecies Diplomacy Summit on Narelle Prime was non-negotiable, and yet she stood there barefoot and agitated because of one problem. Well, one particularly massive, scaled temperamental problem. From the chamber below, a low bellow rumbled up through the stone foundation, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scratching ceramic. Nyara groaned and stalked to the lift shaft. "Vokar, if you're ripping up the bath tiles again, I swear to the moons." The platform descended with a gentle hum, revealing the source of her frustration. 8 feet tall, covered in thick obsidian scales patterned with faint silver veining, spiked tail coiled neatly, 2 glowing orange eyes tracked her with an unsettling mix of affection and mischief. Vokar the Draken was lounging in the hydrobath, like a spoiled monarch muzzle propped against the side mouth, slightly open to catch stray drops from the slow drip misting system. "You're not helping," she told him. He blinked once, then yawned, revealing a row of jagged ivory teeth that could probably take down a hovercraft. Nyara leaned on the railing and sighed. "I need someone to watch you for 5 days. 5. Not a whole lunar cycle, not a military tour, just 5 days. And yet everyone in this damn district acts like you're gonna eat their children." Vokar gave a low chuff, somewhere between a snort and a purr. "Don't you dare laugh." The doorbell rang. She stiffened. Nobody just showed up to her research station on Velthar Ridge. It was remote, surrounded by sheer cliffs and dense thermal jungles. "You didn't drop by for tea." She keyed up the external cam and blinked in surprise. A Terran, male, late 20s, maybe early 30s, with shaggy dark hair, a slightly crooked grin, and a build that suggested he knew his way around heavy equipment or a brawl. He wore a simple jacket with faded mission patches, and his boots were still caked in red dust. Nyara frowned. Terrans don't usually survive this altitude unaccompanied. She opened the intercom. "You're not local," she said. The man looked straight at the camera. "Nope. Name's Beck. Beck Marlin. I heard you needed a pet sitter." Nyara blinked. "Sorry," he scratched the back of his neck, glancing around. Local comms board flagged a distress tag about exotic animal care. "Thought I'd help." She hesitated, then toggled the door open. As the pressure seal hissed and the airlock cycled, Vokar, curious as ever, had already climbed the stairs. Nyara turned just in time to see the Draken step into view, behind her eyes locked on the visitor. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Wait, too late!" Vokar let out a deep territorial growl. Beck didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He stepped forward slowly, gaze steady, lowering himself into a crouch like someone greeting a large suspicious dog. "Well now," he murmured. "Aren't you magnificent?" Nyara watched jaw slack as Beck slowly extended a hand palm out. Vokar sniffed it. There was a tense pause. Then the Draken tilted his massive head, and gods above nuzzled Beck's hand. "I'm dreaming," she whispered. "Or dying. One of the two." Beck gave Vokar a gentle scratch behind the frill. "I used to work with Crestwings back on Epsilon Delta. Not as big as this guy, but just as bitey. You're insane. Debatable. Still house-trained, though." He stood. "So? Do I get the job?" "You want it." He shrugged. "Why not 5 days of lizard sitting in a mountain paradise beats hauling reactor coils for a mining rig? You do realize he's classified as a Category 4 apex predator. Is that before or after bath time?" Beck quipped, eyeing the damp sheen on Vokar's scales. Nyara narrowed her eyes. "You're either brave or stupid. Let's go with charmingly reckless." Vokar let out a deep, pleased rumble. She looked from man to Draken and back again. Fine, you can start tomorrow, but if he eats you, I'm not liable. Beck grinned. I'll add that to the waiver. The next morning, she departed for the summit with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She kept replaying the moment Vokar leaned into Beck's hand over and over. The bond was impossible, unheard of, especially between a Draken and an off-worlder. And yet, something about the Terran was different. 3 days later, diplomatic talks collapsed into a shouting match over border tariffs and translation protocol amendments. Nyara, bored out of her skull, seized the chance to return home early. As her hovercraft banked around the last ridge, her eyes widened. The courtyard was tranquil, no scorched tiles, no shredded shrubbery, not even a single burn mark on the security droids. She stepped out cautiously, sensors sweeping for damage. None. And then she heard it splashing from the back terrace. She hurried through the glass corridors and stopped short. Vokar was in the hydrobath again, soaked, covered in bubbles, and Beck, shirtless, was casually scrubbing behind the Dracon's crest with a giant sponge humming some off-key Terran tune. What are you doing? Beck glanced up, beaming. Hey, you're back early. Hope that's okay. You're bathing him. With soap. Yeah, he kind of fell into some mud chasing a spark chirper. I figured he might appreciate the cleanup. Drakens do not bathe. They exude resin oils that, yeah, he told me. But I think he's into it. Vokar gave a deep, delighted groan and stretched his limbs in pure bliss. Nyara stared, mouth open. That's, biologically implausible. Maybe your biology books need an update. Beck winked. Or maybe Vokar's just an exception. As Nyara stood there utterly dumbfounded, a single soapy paw flicked in her direction. A wave of suds hit her straight in the chest, soaking her formal coat. Beck tried not to laugh, failed spectacularly. You're both insane, she muttered, brushing foam off her shoulders, but her lips betrayed her, curling into the first smile she'd worn in days. Vokar rumbled happily. And Beck, he handed her a second sponge. In case you want to help. Nyara stood motionless, still clutching the dripping sponge Beck had placed in her hand. Her formal coat was slowly dripping suds onto the polished stone tiles beneath her feet. Vokar stretched again in the massive bath ripples, moving through the water like waves across a miniature ocean. The Draken looked smug. She glanced from him to the Terran. You do realize, she said dryly, that you've just committed at least 5 violations of Arxian interspecies interaction protocol, not to mention bathing a protected predator species with unsanctioned chemical agents. Beck tilted his head, still smiling as he wrung out the sponge. What if I told you the soap was imported from Rokel's biosanctuary, fully compatible with dermal scales? Organic, hypoallergenic. Nyara narrowed her eyes. That's surprisingly compliant. Used it on a snarlbeak once. Didn't lose a limb. He stood, water cascading down his torso, and Nyara had to tear her gaze away from the way his skin caught the sunlight filtering through the terrace canopy. Vokar let out a loud snort of approval and flicked his tail. More water hit her leg. Traitor, she muttered to him. He burbled innocently and rolled onto his back. Beck stepped out of the bath, grabbing a towel from the warming rail. So, how'd the summit go? Any progress on galactic unity? She exhaled and plopped down on the edge of the bath, letting her soaked boots drip freely into the runoff channel. They argued for 12 hours about syntax formatting in interspecies treaties, and then walked out over the color of delegate robes. The only thing unified was the mutual hatred. So a productive session. I left before I strangled a diplomat from the Galaxian Accord. Beck nodded sagely. Always a wise choice. You'd hate prison food. Nyara watched as he draped the towel over his shoulders and sat beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers with casual familiarity. For a moment, they simply watched Vokar paddle lazily in the bath, his massive claws tucked contentedly beneath him like a kitten. I've studied Drakens for over a decade, she said after a pause. Run behavioral trials, neurological scans, hormonal analyses. I've published 6 papers on their aggression thresholds, and never have I seen one roll over for belly rubs. Maybe you were too focused on the claws to notice the tail wags. She gave him a sidelong glance. That's not scientific. It's a start. Something about his tone, the quiet confidence of it, made her chest feel lighter than it had in weeks. It was disarming. Infuriating. Also, oddly intoxicating. Has he done anything else strange? She asked. Beck scratched at his chin, thoughtful. He mimicked my hand gestures this morning. At first I thought it was coincidence, but then I repeated a sequence, and he copied it exactly. Then he made a sound, low pulsing. It shook the water, like some kind of harmonic pulse. Nyara sat up straighter. That shouldn't be possible. Drakens don't have the vocal range for resonance. Vokar does. Her eyes narrowed. Show me. For the next hour, Beck led her through a series of demonstrations that defied every paper she'd ever written. Vokar wasn't just compliant, he was engaged. He tracked Beck's hand signs, responded to tone and inflection, and when prompted, produced the deep, rhythmic sound again, sending water dancing across the bath's surface. Nyara recorded everything. Her fingers flew over her datapad as her mind tried to reconcile the living creature before her, with the predator classification assigned to his species. This could change everything, she murmured. His intelligence, his responsiveness. He's not just a biological anomaly. He's proof that Drakens might be something entirely different from what we believed. Beck leaned closer, lowering his voice. You think the others might be like him? I don't know. But if they are, we've been treating an entire species like monsters for no reason. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he was, his damp skin still warm from the bath. Their eyes met. The spark between them pulsed like a second heartbeat. You saw him, she said quietly. Really saw him. Beck smiled slower this time. I saw you too. The air between them hung heavy with something unsaid, something dangerous, something thrilling. And then the security alert chimed. Both of them jumped. Nyara bolted for the console, Beck close behind. The display lit up with the signature of an incoming transmission, government encrypted. She hesitated, then activated the panel. The face of Inspector Vorn stared back at her, his pale orange skin wrinkled in disapproval, and his elongated head ridge twitching like an angry vulture. Xenobiologist Nyara Ress, he began without preamble. You left the summit without clearance. I submitted notice, she replied coolly. It was a procedural walkout. My presence was no longer required. Perhaps. But what concerns the Council more is your choice of company. Beck raised an eyebrow. Should I waive an unregistered Terran male has been reported at your residence? You failed to declare him to the planetary registry, and there are rumors of unauthorized interaction with a Class A predator species. Nyara's stomach twisted. Who reported this? Your neighbor, biologist Arvin Jewell. Of course, jealous petty little Arvin, who'd always hated that her funding doubled his. I assure you, no experimentation has occurred, she said, voice tight. Mr. Marlin is a certified xenofaunal specialist. Beck, to his credit, held up a glowing identification badge that shimmered with official interstellar clearance. Vorn's gaze was as sharp as a vibroblade. The Council has dispatched investigators. They will arrive by midday tomorrow. I suggest you prepare for questioning. The transmission cut. Silence fell. Beck looked at her, the easy charm gone from his voice. They're coming for him. They'll take Vokar, she whispered. Sedate him. Dissect him. They won't see what we see. They'll only see danger. Beck stepped closer. Then we get him out of here. She blinked. You mean? Run, his voice was low, urgent. We've got less than 18 hours. Do you know the terrain well enough to move without being tracked? Nyara stared at him. The bath, the soap, the Terran stranger with the absurd grin. And now this. Yes, she said. I mapped these mountains myself. He grinned. Then let's pack light. From the bath, Vokar rumbled as if in agreement. Later that night, Nyara stood in her quarters, stuffing supplies into a rucksack. Her datapad buzzed with alerts she ignored. The assembly could wait. What mattered now was keeping Vokar safe and maybe figuring out what the hell this human was doing to her heart. Beck appeared in the doorway, dressed in durable gear, eyes serious for once. You sure about this? He asked. I've broken bones before, she said. Never the law. First time for everything. She glanced at the transport parked outside, its lights dimmed. Inside, Vokar waited, sedated just enough to stay calm but alert. Her gaze shifted back to Beck. I'm not just doing this for science, she said quietly. I know. They didn't kiss. Not yet. but her fingers brushed his as she passed, and that one touch said everything. The hovercraft moved like a shadow through the mountain mists, its quiet pulse barely audible over the distant howl of night winds, racing across Valthar Ridge. Beck kept one hand on the manual controls, the other hovering near the terrain scanner, as the craft dipped beneath a stone archway, carved by centuries of erosion. Beside him, Niara crouched over her datapad, her luminous indigo skin glowing faintly in the dark cabin. Behind them, Vokar lay curled in the rear of the vehicle, his massive frame wedged between the secured crates of supplies. He was quiet save for the occasional puff of breath that misted the rear vents. Occasionally, his tail thumped once in response to Beck's voice. "We'll reach the Thalin descent before sunrise," Niara said, her voice low. "Once we enter the Koran Basin, the mineral content in the rocks will mask our transport signature." Beck shot her a sideways glance. "So smuggling a classified predator through a mountain range while dodging planetary authorities. This your idea of a date?" She didn't look up. "On Arxia, this is considered foreplay." He smirked. "Remind me to never ask what counts as third base." Despite the quip, tension knotted between them. Not just because of the danger or the mission, but because of what had already begun to take root between them, something fragile and burning and undeniably real. Niara had spent most of her adult life chasing data logic, measurable outcomes. But nothing about Beck Marlin felt like a controlled experiment. He was chaos wrapped in charm, danger served with a side of wit. And most unsettling of all, he made her feel like she wasn't just alive, but seen. "Power level," she asked, checking the reserves. 70%. Enough to get us through the basin, maybe halfway to the valley. Assuming there is a valley. She shot him a glance. "You don't believe me, I believe you. I'm just not in the habit of trusting ancient research notes, especially ones that say things like, possibly mythical habitat." Niara didn't respond, but her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. By the time the first pale rays of dawn reached the peaks, the hovercraft had slipped into the shadowed gorge known as the Mauve Tarith, a winding corridor between two sheer cliff faces that narrowed dangerously at its midpoint. Beck slowed the craft. "Looks tight. It's our best option. The mineral density here will short-range most tracking tech. If we can get through without scraping the sides, we'll vanish from planetary grid coverage." Vokar stirred behind them. His nostrils flared. A deep, low rumble rippled through his chest. Niara turned alert. He senses something. Bad something. Possibly. He's never false alarmed before. Beck leaned forward, squinting into the growing light. The gorge ahead bent sharply to the right. Beyond the turn, there was movement, fluttering shadows, and a faint glint of metal. "Drones," he said grimly. Niara swore under her breath. "Council patrol. They must have predicted the route." Beck's hands tightened on the yoke. "Hold on." The craft lurched as he yanked hard to the left, skimming the cliff wall. Vokar let out a warning bellow as plasma streaked past them, tracking rounds designed to disable engines without causing fatal crashes. Their hovercraft dipped dangerously, alarms flaring, then stabilized as Beck forced it lower. "There's a split," Niara shouted, pointing to a narrow ravine veering off the main gorge. Beck didn't hesitate. He turned into the gap, the hovercraft scraping so close to the rock that sparks flew. The drones surged after them, but the walls were too narrow, their rotors too wide. One clipped the side and spun out, detonating against the cliff. Another lost signal entirely. After 2 harrowing minutes, silence returned. They emerged into a cavernous opening, an underground basin with glowing fungal blooms and trickling mineral falls. The air shimmered faintly with magnetic distortion. Beck parked the craft under a rock shelf. The moment it settled, Niara leapt out and scanned the perimeter. Vokar followed, sniffing the ground and letting out a low, satisfied hum. "We lost them," she said. "For now." Beck sat on the edge of the craft and let out a long breath. "Remind me again why we didn't just let the Draken handle it." Niara smirked. "Because I'm pretty sure Vokar would have eaten one of the drones. Then we'd be flagged for destruction of council property and improper recycling protocol." He laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Damn, I hate violating environmental regulations." They shared a look, a real one. No sarcasm, no masks, just relief, tension, and something new blooming between them in the quiet. "Come on," she said. "We should rest a few hours, then make the final push." They set up a small camp beneath the overhang. Vokar curled up at the edge of the light, his breathing steady, his eyes half-lidded. Nyara sat on a folded blanket, sipping rehydrated tea and reviewing her field notes. Beck lay beside her, arms behind his head, watching the shifting mineral lights dance across the stone ceiling. "You were right," he said. Nyara looked over. "About this place, the geography, the field distortions. It's like the mountains themselves want to stay hidden. They do. This region is riddled with sinkholes, magnetic dead zones, and collapsed mining attempts. That's why the valley hasn't been formally mapped. Nobody could stay long enough to do it." Beck turned his head to face her. "And yet you're leading me there with a fugitive predator and a satchel full of contraband research." She smiled faintly. "Told you, Arxian foreplay." Beck reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Nyara didn't move away. "You're incredible, you know that." She raised an eyebrow. "Because I'm a renegade scientist dragging a sarcastic Terran through classified territory, no. Because you haven't run from any of this. Not from the truth. Not from him." He gestured toward Vokar. "And not from me." The cave around them seemed to grow quieter. "I've always run," Nyara admitted, voice soft. "From politics, from pressure, from anything I couldn't dissect and categorize." And now she looked at him. "Now I'm not so sure I want to." He leaned in. She didn't stop him. Their lips met in a kiss that started tentative, exploring, but deepened with the urgency of two people realizing the time they had might be fleeting. When they pulled apart, her head was resting against his shoulder, and neither of them said a word for a long while. Eventually, Nyara stirred. "Rest," she murmured. "We move again at dusk." Beck nodded, but before he closed his eyes, he looked at her one more time. "You're not the only one who stopped running." Hours later, as they emerged from the basin and crested the final ridge, Nyara froze. The valley stretched out before them. It was real. A hidden cradle of green and gold, wreathed in mist and humming with life. Trees taller than any in recorded Arxian data. Pools of mineral-rich water reflecting the twin moons. And near the center, moving like shadows through the brush, were shapes. Big ones, Draken-shaped. Beck whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Vokar stood still, his entire body quivering. And then he roared. A long, echoing call that rolled across the valley like thunder. From the forest, a second roar answered. Nyara's pulse spiked. They heard him. Beck grinned. "Looks like we're not alone." The sound that answered Vokar's roar wasn't just an echo. It was deeper layered and unmistakably intentional. Nyara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a territorial challenge or a random call into the wild. This was a reply. Vokar surged forward before either of them could react. His claws gripped the soft earth as he descended into the valley at a controlled, eager lope, tail high and swaying. "Wait," Nyara called, breaking into a run. Beck was right beside her, sprinting across the moss-covered rocks and weaving between towering fern-like trees that shimmered with silvery spores. The vegetation grew denser the farther they followed, but not hostile, almost inviting. Some plants parted at their approach as if sensing their presence. "I feel like we've just walked into someone's house without knocking," Beck muttered, ducking a bioluminescent vine. "That's because we have," Nyara said under her breath. Vokar led them into a wide clearing, and what they saw made both humans and Arxians freeze. They weren't alone. At least 12 other Drakons stood among the mist-wreathed trees, their obsidian and cobalt hides catching the dawn light. Some were taller, more heavily muscled than Vokar. Others were smaller, leaner, clearly juveniles. They watched with cautious eyes, some suspicious, some curious, but none aggressive. Then one stepped forward. This Drakon was larger than Vokar by a head, its scales tinged with deep violet, and its frills adorned with what looked like naturally grown, spiral-twisted bone ornaments. It let out a short, resonant rumble, not a warning, but a greeting. Vokar responded with a series of chuffs and pulses Nyara had never heard before. They began to circle each other slowly, deliberately, until Vokar lowered his head and nudged the other Drakon's flank gently. "They know each other," she whispered, stunned. "This isn't a pack reunion, it's family." Beck stepped closer to her. "You're saying he's been here before?" "Not just been here," she said. "Belongs here." Another Drakon patted forward, this one was smaller, its scales still lacking the hardened sheen of age. It moved with jerky energy, and then like Vokar did days ago, it began making hand gestures. Beck stiffened. That's the sequence I taught Vokar. Exactly. Nyara's pulse quickened. They've internalized it, passed it along. This isn't mimicry, it's communication, cultural transmission. So they're not just intelligent, he said slowly. They're civilized. A collective hum rippled through the group, a deep resonant tone that made the air thrum. Nyara could feel it in her chest like standing near a power conduit. She reached for her datapad instinctively. We need to record this, she breathed. This changes everything. Before she could raise the recorder, the violet-scaled Drakon stepped toward her. Her first instinct was to back away, but Beck gently touched her arm. Let it. The Drakon stopped just a meter away and slowly reached out with one massive clawed hand. Its fingers moved in the same gesture sequence Vokar had learned. She watched awestruck and mirrored the movements. The Drakon's yellow eyes locked onto hers. It made a soft sound in its throat, then turned and beckoned them to follow. Beck grinned. Well, now I know what your version of a VIP tour looks like. They were led through a narrow forest path deeper into the valley, where the landscape gave way to terraced pools of steaming mineral-rich water. The air here was thick with fragrance, sweet earthy, and strangely calming. Along the banks of the springs, smaller Drakons lounged grooming one another and rolling playfully in the shallow edges. Vokar immediately bounded into one of the pools, letting out a pleased growl that reverberated through the canopy. Tell me this isn't happening, Nyara whispered. Beck just shook his head, laughing quietly. The bubble bath was cultural. You were the one saying it couldn't be possible. She stared in wonder. We weren't seeing abnormal behavior. We were interrupting a species ritual. The violet Drakon, clearly a matriarch of some kind, motioned them again. They were led into a cave mouth partially hidden by hanging moss. Inside, the walls glowed with bioluminescent lichen, revealing what could only be described as cave art. It was crude but clear. Drakons hunting, Drakons raising young, Drakons interacting with other species, some humanoid, some indistinct. One mural showed a figure, small, bipedal, standing beside a Drakon with open arms. Beck exhaled slowly. They've been trying to talk to us for years, and we treated them like monsters. Nyara stepped closer to the wall, her eyes wide with reverence. There's so much we've missed, so much we chose not to see. A low beep sounded from her belt. She cursed. Comms ping. High priority transmission. They've found the escape route. Beck stepped to her side. Council. She nodded grimly. They'll send an expeditionary force, probably armed. If they find this valley, his voice was hard now. They'll tear it apart in the name of containment. She looked at him. We have to stop them. How? By showing them this. Everything. The communication, the culture, the art, the rituals, the truth. And they'll believe us. She met his eyes fire sparking beneath the surface of her steady calm. If they don't, I'll make them. Outside, the matriarch let out a resonant call. Vokar returned it. The Drakons were gathering again, sensing something, preparing. They know, Beck said quietly. They know what's coming. Nyara nodded. And they trust us. A new transmission came through, encrypted, but not blocked. Nyara pulled it up and blinked. It's from Counselor Tureen, one of the Assembly's progressives. She's heard rumors. She's asking to meet. Beck raised an eyebrow. Alone, she says she'll come without escort. 2 days from now, we've got one shot to prove everything. He stepped closer, resting his hand on hers. Then let's make it count. She looked up at him. Beck, if this fails, if they don't believe us, they will, he said. And if they don't, we'll find a way to protect this place. Together. Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was his confidence, or maybe it was the realization that this wasn't just about research anymore. Not just about truth. It was about belonging, not just for Vokar and his kin, but for them too. All right, she whispered. Let's prepare. That night, under the star-speckled sky of Arxia, Nyara and Beck worked side by side, cataloging every sign, every behavior, every echo of intelligence the valley had to offer. They didn't rest. They didn't need to. The fire inside them was stronger than fatigue. Vokar lay beside the fire, his eyes half-lidded, a silent guardian. Around him, his family watched alert, yet calm, as if they knew something was shifting in the stars. And above them, all the violet matriarch raised her head to the moons and sang, a song of warning, a song of hope, a song of home. The valley awoke to filtered sunlight streaming through misty treetops. Warm beams lanced between trunks, catching on drifting spores, and the gleam of obsidian-scaled hides as the dragon stretched and stirred. Somewhere near the springs, juvenile howls turned into musical chirrups, a morning ritual Nyrsha now understood to be part of social bonding. She stood at the edge of the cliffs above the clearing, her datapad glowing with dense notes, graphs, recordings. Everything they had learned in just one day, not just communication, not just culture, but empathy, social hierarchy, cooperative rituals. This wasn't just a breakthrough, it was a biological revolution. Beck joined her, still tugging on his jacket. Any word from Tareen? She nodded, eyes locked on the horizon. Her transport enters planetary atmosphere in 2 hours. We'll meet her at the glade south of the valley. She's agreed to no security, strictly scientific observation. Beck raised an eyebrow. You believe that? Nyara hesitated. I want to. He stepped closer. Then I'll believe it too. She glanced at him. In the light, his features were softer, more grounded. She reached up without thinking and adjusted the collar of his jacket. He grinned. You always this handsy with your field assistants, only the ones who wash apex predators in soap bubbles. They both laughed, but not long. The moment was too fragile. By mid-morning, they stood at the meeting point, a clearing rimmed by ancient spiral-bark trees that buzzed with small nectar gliders. Vokar loomed just behind Nyara's shoulder, his protective instincts fully engaged but calm, trusting. The hum of approaching engines rippled across the trees. A sleek, diplomatic transport glided down on silent stabilizers, its underbelly shimmering with the soft purple insignia of the Progressive Council faction. The hatch hissed open. Tareen stepped out alone. Nyara exhaled. She hadn't realized how long she'd been holding her breath. Tareen was tall and graceful, her deep violet skin marked by silver paint denoting her station. Her eyes were sharp but not cold, and as they settled on Vokar, her lips parted not in fear, but in awe. By the moon, she whispered, stepping forward. He's beautiful. He's also articulate, Beck said, in a resonant, thunder-your-rib-cage kind of way. Nyara stepped forward. Counselor, thank you for coming. I had to see it for myself, Tareen said, still watching Vokar with fascination. Your reports were difficult to believe. Nyara handed her the datapad. We've cataloged communication gestures, harmonic vocalizations, social bonding behaviors, and visual artistry in the cave network. Tareen began to read, her eyes widening. Vokar, as if sensing the importance of the moment, stepped closer and performed one of the gesture sequences. Slow, clear. Tareen froze. That's structured, not mimicked. Beck nodded. They're teaching each other. Intergenerational knowledge, cultural memory. And there's more inside the valley. Tareen was silent for a long time. Then she looked up. This must be protected. The whole colony. Nyara smiled. Then you'll bring this to the council? Yes, she said firmly. But we'll need to, a shriek of engines cut across her voice. They all turned. Another transport. Not diplomatic. Larger, armed. No, Nyara breathed. They followed her. Tareen spun toward her own ship. I didn't send coordinates to anyone, Beck grabbed Nyara's arm. We have to run. Now! But it was too late. The new transport slammed into the clearing with thunderous force. Its side doors burst open and armed council enforcers poured out weapons, raised visors down. By order of the Council of Arxia, barked a commanding voice. You are hereby detained for violation of interspecies research protocols and obstruction of containment procedures. Nyara's eyes locked on the figure stepping from the lead ship, Inspector Vorn, smirking. You absolute bastard, she hissed. Vorn didn't even look at her. His eyes were locked on Vokar. Target acquired. Sedate the specimen. The first enforcer raised a tranquilizer rifle. Vokar roared. So did the trees. From every shadow, every ridge of the valley's edge, the Drakens emerged silent, immense, coordinated. Within seconds, over 20 of them flanked Nyara, Beck, and Tareen. The largest among them stepped between the humans and the enforcers and let out a single echoing tone. A warning. "Hold your fire!" Tareen shouted, stepping forward. "Inspector, this is not a containment zone." "They're apex predators," Vorn snapped. "We will not allow them to escape control." "You're not listening," Nyara yelled. "They understand us. They're trying to protect their own." Vorn gestured to his squad. "Stand by to fire." Vokar's frills snapped wide, and his siblings mirrored him. Beck stepped between the two forces. "This is insane. You fire one shot and you'll start a war you can't win." Vorn stepped forward, weapon drawn. Nyara moved without thinking. "Don't you touch him." But before Vorn could raise the gun, a small draken cub emerged from the trees. It padded forward unafraid and looked up at Vorn. Its bright eyes blinked slowly. It sat, then raised one claw, and gestured. A full sequence. Silence fell. Vorn's hands shook. Tareen whispered, "They're children. They're learning." Another draken approached carrying something in its mouth. A plant fragrant rare known among Arxians as a peace offering. It laid the flower at Vorn's feet. The enforcers wavered, and slowly weapons lowered. Tareen stepped forward. "I'll report this to the council myself. If you attack them now, it's not containment. It's a massacre." Vorn's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Beck leaned toward Nyara. "Let's get out before he changes his mind." They returned to the heart of the valley, the Drakens, moving with them, not as guards, but as family. Inside the largest cave, Tareen sat with Nyara and Beck reviewing every file, every scan. "This will change policy," she said. "They're not only sentient, they're sapient." "Then we'll need more than protection," Nyara said. "We need recognition, rights." Vokar nosed into the cave and dropped his heavy head on Beck's shoulder. "Affectionate death machine," Beck muttered, scratching behind the frill. Tareen smiled. "I'll recommend full sanctuary status. You'll be listed as primary researchers." Nyara leaned back exhausted but filled with hope. "And the council will listen." Tareen nodded. "They'll have to." Outside, the valley hummed with new morning life. Inside, Nyara let her hand slip into Beck's. Not as an accident, not as a reflex, as a promise. The declaration came at dusk. Projected in shimmering light across every major outpost, city spire, and orbital relay on Arxia, the Council's emergency broadcast was short, but the impact echoed across the planet. In light of newly submitted evidence and direct observation by Council investigators, the Felidrak species formerly classified as Category 4 apex predators is hereby reclassified as sapient non-humanoid. The valley known as Sector Epsilon 19 is to be granted provisional sanctuary status under the Unified Species Preservation Accord. Beck sat on a rock outcrop overlooking the valley, one boot resting on a smaller stone, the other swinging idly over the edge. Behind him, the Felidrak cubs tumbled through the moss, chirping and growling in low harmonic tones as they practiced the communication sequences he'd helped Vokar refine. Below them, Nyara paced outside the research tent comm unit, pressed to her ear, fending off the 12th vid call of the day. "No, Professor Kell, you may not send an excavation team." "Yes, I'm aware this is an unprecedented breakthrough. That's exactly why we're restricting access." She disconnected with a sharp sigh. Beck turned his head. More fame and fortune knocking at the door. More like a swarm of bureaucrats trying to name the valley after themselves. Tareen's hollow. Vorn's regret. Nyara smirked despite herself. "I liked your suggestion better." Bubble Bath Basin. Beck gave a lazy salute. Always happy to brand history. She finally approached him, plopping down beside him on the warm rock. He handed her a water canister. "Drink." "You've been on a warpath all day. I'm just tired of people seeing them as an opportunity instead of a people." Beck nodded toward the Felidrax. "They seem unconcerned. They're used to being misjudged." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the older Drakens gather at the hot springs. The Violet Matriarch stood still as Vokar approached her, bowed his head, and then in a slow, deliberate motion, repeated a new gesture, one he and Beck had developed together to mean safe. She mirrored it. Beck murmured, "That one gets me every time." "They're learning us too," Nyara said, "adapting to our symbols, our patterns. This isn't a one-way street, it's mutual understanding." "You sound surprised." She looked at him. "I'm not. I'm just amazed." Still, he chuckled. You get that look in your eye every time someone says something profound. It's the look of a xenobiologist reevaluating her entire worldview. He reached over and touched her cheek. Still looks good on you. She blushed slightly. Just a hint of violet beneath the indigo. Careful or I'll have to add emotional disruption to your personnel file. He leaned in. Want to disrupt something else? She swatted him gently, laughing. But she didn't move away. Their moment was broken by the chime of the external perimeter alarm. Beck rose instantly. Proximity alert. Nyara checked the source. Not council. Civilian ship. Registered to O stars, it's my mother. Beck froze. You mean High Administrator Ress, the one who publicly declared you brilliant, reckless, and in need of a husband with more sense than her? That's the one. The transport descended like judgment itself, sleek, gleaming, and painfully official. The hatch hissed open and out stepped the most terrifying figure Beck had ever seen. Not because of size or weaponry, but because of her presence. Tall, elegant spine, impossibly straight, with hair braided into an intricate double crown. Administrator Tavira Ress took one look at her daughter's mud-splattered boots and outdoor jacket and sighed audibly. Nyara, you look rugged, Mother Nyara said, managing a neutral tone. Beck stepped forward, offering a respectful nod. Beck Marlin, field specialist. Tavira gave him a slow, full-body scan. Terran. Of course, Nyara cut in quickly. If you're here to drag me back to the capital, you're wasting fuel. The council has already accepted our proposal. Sanctuary status is confirmed. Tavira didn't blink. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to understand what made my daughter commit career suicide with such public flair. Nyara bristled. It wasn't suicide, it was truth. Beck watched the exchange like a wildlife documentary. One wrong move and someone might lose an ear. Tavira's gaze turned toward the valley. The Feladrax were watching, heads tilted curiously. May I meet one that stunned Nyara? But she nodded. Vokar approached slowly, posture neutral but alert. He stopped 2 meters from Tavira and inclined his head. The gesture, once threatening, now read clearly as a formal hello. Tavira stared into his eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, she made the simplest of the learned hand signs. Peace. Vokar repeated it. Tavira exhaled. Incredible. Beck whispered to Nyara. I think she just had an emotional experience. Should we be worried she'll deny it under oath? Nyara replied. That night they invited Tavira to join them by the fire. She sat beside her daughter in dignified silence, sipping local tea. Beck and Vokar shared a blanket, the massive Drakon curled around his shoulders like a sentient heating system. Tavira finally broke the silence. You were right, Nyara. I tried to mold you into something I thought would survive our political landscape. But you've reshaped the landscape instead. Nyara blinked. Is that an apology? Tavira smirked. It's a rare concession. Don't let it go to your head. Beck leaned toward Nyara. She's growing on me, like fungus. As laughter drifted into the night, the violet matriarch stood at the cave entrance, watching the humans and Feladrax together. Then she turned and etched a new symbol into the cave wall, one that mirrored the gesture of peace. And beside it another symbol, 2 figures hand in hand, one with scales, one without. 3 days after the sanctuary declaration, the valley wasn't quiet. Scouts moved through the Canopy Council, representatives flew overhead for observational surveys, and researchers arrived in droves, most kept outside the inner ring by Nyara's strict perimeter. The Feladrax thankfully tolerated the growing presence, though their matriarch kept a watchful gaze from the high bluffs. Beck found it harder to sleep now, not because of the danger he was used to danger, but because peace he was learning was a different kind of pressure. At least when someone's pointing a gun at you, the situation is clear. But politics, nuanced committee panels, and petition reviews, that kind of war was slower, more insidious. Nyara sat across from him in the command tent, flicking through her datapad with a scowl deep enough to cut granite. They're pushing back, she muttered. Some factions say Feladrax can't be classified as sapient unless one gives a public speech. Do they need to wear a tie too? She didn't laugh. Beck leaned forward. They're scared, Nyara. You rewrote a cornerstone of Arxian biology in a week. It's not that they don't believe you, it's that if they do, they have to admit everything else might be wrong too. Progress shouldn't require permission from cowards. He smiled, said like a true revolutionary. She tossed the datapad aside and leaned back, rubbing her temples. The worst part, they're sending another inspection team, not scientists, security auditors, supposedly just to verify perimeter safety. But we both know what that means. Pretext, Beck said grimly. They're testing for weaknesses. Nyara nodded. And if they find any excuse, they'll revoke the sanctuary, reclassify Felidrax as anomalous threats, transfer them to containment. Beck stood. Then we show them what they're really protecting. She looked up at him. You've got an idea, yeah, he said. A demonstration, something they can't unsee. That evening, with Nyara's reluctant approval, Beck began working with Vokar and the matriarch. The adult Felidrax were skeptical at first, but Vokar, whose loyalty had long shifted from pack to both, bridged the gap. In a clearing near the caves, they arranged objects, stones, branches, soft tiles of biopolymer. Beck mapped symbols, Nyara programmed gesture sequences. The matriarch mimicked them. So did two juveniles. By the time the auditors arrived, the valley was humming with anticipation. Inspector Vorn was not among them this time. In his place came Director Halvek, a cold-eyed administrator who wore her uniform like armor and spoke as if everything had already been decided. The council has requested independent verification of sapient capability, she said flatly. You will present your evidence, after which your sanctuary status will be subject to review. Tareen, now acting as the valley's political liaison, folded her arms. You'll get your proof. The demonstration began with simple pattern recognition, two Felidrax choosing matching symbols from a randomized array. Then they progressed to gesture sequences, then to group coordination. When one of the juveniles arranged stones into a pattern, matching a glyph from the cave friend, even Halvek raised an eyebrow. But Beck saved the best for last. He stepped forward, flanked by Vokar and the matriarch, and made the peace gesture. Then another protect, then learn. Vokar followed. The matriarch followed. Then she added one, a new gesture. Slow, precise. Home, Nyara whispered. She's teaching us. Halvek was silent. Then she stepped forward and without warning snapped her fingers. A nearby security officer raised a scanner. It emitted a shrill pulse. Vokar reeled back, snarling in pain. The matriarch shrieked. The others stirred. Beck was on his feet in an instant. What the hell was that? Halvek looked unmoved. Stress response analysis, to determine if sapience persists under duress. Nyara stepped in front of Vokar. You're torturing him. It was a non-lethal sonic disruptor, Halvek said coolly. Standard field equipment. If your subjects are truly intelligent, they'll distinguish aggression from examination. Behind her, two security officers reached for their sidearms. Nyara's voice dropped to a cold, dangerous whisper. You want to test intelligence? You should start with your own. Back. Off. Beck stepped beside her. You've got your data. And if you try that again, you're going to find out what happens when we feel threatened. The moment held tense as a pulled tripwire. Then Halvek, infuriatingly calm, gave a nod. We've seen enough. She turned and walked back toward her shuttle. No apology, no acknowledgement, just dismissal. That night the camp was quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet of deep waters just before the storm breaks. Beck sat by the fire, rubbing Vokar's frill gently. The big Draken was still shuddering occasionally, a residual tremor from the sonic pulse. She heard him, Nyara said, kneeling on the other side. On purpose. They're not here to understand. They're here to confirm their own fear. Nyara looked at Beck, her expression haunted. What if we can't stop them? Beck reached over and took her hand. Then we make them listen, not with proof, with truth. And if that's not enough, then we fight. He meant it, every word. She leaned into his touch. I never wanted a fight, but you got me anyway. Her laugh was soft and cracked. You know, for someone who showed up to scrub my pet, you're surprisingly hard to get rid of. He kissed her hand. You'd miss me. She didn't deny it. Later, long after the fires dimmed and the stars began to fade, Nyara stared up at the velvet sky and whispered, They're going to take this place away from us. Beck pulled her against him. Then we hold it. With claws, with data, with everything. She turned to him, suddenly fierce. Let's give them something they can't erase. In the shadows of the valley, the Felidrax sang low and unified the harmonics vibrating through the stone. A warning, a vow. The summit chamber on Arxia's orbital capital ring had never been so full. Delegates from 12 planetary systems filled the tiers, murmuring behind sealed visors, their expressions unreadable behind layered translation filters and diplomatic formality. At the center of the amphitheater stood a dais, cold, sterile, built for declarations, not discoveries. On it, Nyara Rest stood with her head high and datapad in hand. To her right, Terrene firm poised. To her left, Beck Marlin, Terran, civilian, disruptor. And next to him, resting calmly at his feet, was Vokar. No one said a word, but the silence trembled like glass under pressure. Nyara stepped forward. Counselors, observers, esteemed species of the Accord. I stand here not as a rebel, but as a researcher. Not as a daughter of a high-ranking administrator, but as someone who made the mistake of trusting protocol over instinct. Until I met him. She nodded at Vokar. The massive Draken blinked, then sat upright and produced the peace gesture with fluid grace. A gasp swept through the room. Nyara continued, voice clear. We thought they were beasts. We were wrong. They are sapient. They learn. They share language. They pass knowledge through generations. They sing in harmony and bury their dead with ritual. They possess culture, memory, emotion. She gestured to the projected mural now hovering above them, a live 3D feed of the cave wall in the Felidrak Valley. Dozens of symbols and pictographs lined its surface. Recent additions made after the security incursion glowed brighter, one depicting a human and Arxian hand clasped over a Dracon's crest. Another, clearly drawn by the matriarch herself, showed the council's insignia circled in a symbol for question. Beck took a step forward. I'm not a scientist, he said plainly, but I've worked with dangerous creatures. I've seen real predators. Vokar could have ripped me in half the first time we met. Instead, he let me scratch behind his ear and get him covered in suds. A few chuckles broke the tension, just a few. Beck pressed on. You want data, fine. The valley contains over 70 documented communication sequences. Felidrax have passed 10 independent sapience markers across 3 behavioral categories. But more than that, they chose to trust us. That alone proves more than any blood sample ever could. Nyara nodded. And now the council has a choice: to protect that trust or destroy it. The chamber was silent. Then the moderator spoke, voice carefully neutral. Thank you. The council will now deliberate. They were escorted to a side chamber, dim, silent, pulsing with diplomatic tension. Vokar lay between them, eyes half-lidded but alert. Beck paced. They're going to stall, delay, bury this in subcommittee until it's no longer news. No, Nyara said softly. They know the galaxy is watching now. We've made this public. He stopped and turned to her. And if they don't care, then we go back to the valley. And we hold the line, with or without them. He smiled. You're terrifying when you get righteous. And yet you haven't run. I've got a Draken now. He'd miss me. She stepped closer. So would I. He kissed her softly this time. No panic, no fear, just the calm, impossible strength that comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard. The door slid open. Terrene stepped in, a glint of something unreadable in her eyes. They voted. Nyara swallowed, and Terrene smiled. Unanimous. 3 months later, the Felidrak Valley was officially registered as an independent cultural biosphere under the Intergalactic Sapience Accord. Drakens, now recognized under their true name Felidrax, were granted species protections, education observers, and diplomatic emissary status. Vokar, as the matriarch's first recognized bridge bond to another species, became a symbol of peaceful coexistence across dozens of planets. And Nyara, she was still in the valley, still stubborn, still working, still arguing with researchers about access points and echo scan protocols. But now she did it while wearing Beck's old jacket. She found him that evening outside the main camp, where he sat beside Vokar with a bowl of sizzling field stew. Dinner, he said, holding it up like an offering. She took it and sat beside him. Vokar rumbled, nudging both of them until they leaned together. Field's quiet tonight, Beck said. Peaceful. You miss the chaos, I miss pretending it wasn't personal. Beck leaned closer. Still think it was just about science. She smiled. Not anymore. They ate in silence for a while. In the distance, the matriarch sang. Others joined in, young and old. The harmonics resonated deep into the stone. Do you ever think, Niara asked quietly, what would have happened if I hadn't opened that door? Beck tilted his head. Nope. Why not? Because you did. She smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. You're terrible at hypothetical romance. He grinned. I'm great at practical romance. Prove it. He kissed her again under the stars, surrounded by creatures once thought impossible. And in that strange valley on that once divided world, they built something better than science. They built a future. Together.